And welcome in, guys. This is Basch CFB bringing you this presentation of my rankings coming in to Rivalry weekend. And it is a very good weekend for college football. A lot of crazy things have happened, including like 2007, where West Virginia was knocked off. Number one, I believe, maybe number two. West Virginia was knocked off by Pitt. LSU was knocked off by Arkansas in 2007. Or how about in the past, we've had crazy Bedlam games. We've had crazy Stanford, Notre Dame games. Michigan, Ohio State back in the 90s was pretty crazy with upsets, and even in 2001 as well, the other way around with Ohio State upsetting Michigan. So Rivalry weekend is about here, and here's my top 25 for you, and I can go ahead and explain everything for you as well. Number 25 is the Iowa Hawkeyes. The Iowa Hawkeyes are going to have the Nebraska Cornhuskers this week. They have right now 4 losses on the season to Wisconsin at home, Penn State on the road, Purdue on the road, and Northwestern on the road. 3 straight losses coming into this weekend's game against Illinois, in which Illinois was looking a little bit better. In fact, Illinois in this game was not favorite for sure, but they did come in with a record of 3-7. So they weren't terrible. They weren't great for sure, but they were supposed to be a team that could keep it a little closer than it was against Iowa. 63-0 is a statement. Iowa looked good, and it made the Big Ten look good. Number 24 is going to be Fresno State. Now, Fresno State beating UCLA is looking a little bit better now, despite the fact that UCLA is a lot weaker. They did lose to Minnesota and Boise State 2 tests, but a big win against San Diego State at home, locking away their division in the Mountain West. Really big for them. And moving on is going to be number 23, Mississippi State. And I've been reluctant to give Mississippi State some love. They have no real big wins. Their biggest win of the year is probably against Auburn, 23-9. They've also beaten A&M. But that's probably their biggest win of the year this season, with a 7-4 record, and they have Mississippi coming up in the Egg Bowl on Thursday night, Thanksgiving, and Mississippi State last year lost to the Rebels, and let's see if they have a repeat of that here near the bottom of my top 25 poll. Number 22 is going to be the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State, coming off of a loss against Texas, had really gotten going with Brock Purdy as a quarterback, with a win streak that stretched 5 games after the TCU loss on the road by 3 points. They beat Oklahoma State, beat number 12 West Virginia, Texas Tech, Kansas, and Baylor on the stretch, and then they finally get tested against Texas here, the 6-4 Hawkeyes, Cyclones, wrong Iowa team, and they just weren't able to come out with really any sort of great offense in this ball game. Brock Purdy struggled, and that whole entire team struggled until in the second half, and that's when Iowa State kind of made it a little bit closer, but overall just could not compete with Texas on that day. And that day was yesterday. Number 21 is Kentucky, and Kentucky is another odd team. They really don't have much of big wins. They beat Mississippi State, which is a ranked team at the moment for me. They've also beaten Florida, which is another ranked team. But their losses to Texas A&M, Georgia, and Tennessee's a big one. They got throttled against Tennessee. Really hurt them, and that's why they are below a team in Northwestern, which we have not named yet, because Northwestern won their division, and Northwestern's on a hot streak, and their losses aren't that bad. Moving on to Northwestern, they are sitting here at 7-4 at number 21. And the reason I jumped Northwestern over them is because the big one against Minnesota really proving all the doubters wrong, and I thought that was a marquee statement for them to say, hey, we're getting all this love, we're going to stay here. Their losses are by 10 to Notre Dame, by 14 to Duke, by 5 to Akron, and by 3 to Michigan. And you watch the Akron game again, and it just seemed like kind of a fluky loss for Northwestern where just nothing was going their way late. Akron came back and won the game. Not really much of an excuse for that one, but besides that, they don't have a bad loss. They lose to Duke on the road, or at home, excuse me, and Michigan at home by 3, and Notre Dame at home. But beating teams like Iowa, Wisconsin, and also beating Michigan State, those games take Northwestern a little bit farther. And an opening week win against Purdue takes Northwestern a little bit farther than I would love. Number 19, Boise State. And Boise State sitting here as the second best team in their own conference. Did not quite expect this, losing to Oklahoma State and San Diego State at home. Oklahoma State was just a bad loss for them, but I feel like that did not completely show their team, and they've gotten going as of late, especially on offense against Colorado State, putting up 56-48 against Air Force, and also recently 45 against New Mexico, and knowing how to win defensively in the last two matchups between them and BYU and Fresno State. So Boise State's just kind of a trendy team right now at 8-2, and we're going to be it's going to be interesting to see if they can continue on this little hot streak and possibly win the conference at 9-2. They do have Utah State though coming up, which may be the best team in their conference. Number 18 is going to be the Syracuse Orangemen. Syracuse is coming off of a blowout loss against Notre Dame on NBC that we were all aware of. That was probably the game of the day, despite game day not being there. Probably hyped up to be the game of the day. Their losses to Clemson, Pitt, and Notre Dame aren't bad losses. None of them are. Pitt is a team that is in the top. The top 25 in the AP poll, but they still are top the Coastal Division right now. I don't even know why I was trying to say that. That's why I stopped there. But struggled early against Western Michigan, allowing 42 points in that game, allowing 44 to Pitt, 37 to North Carolina, 41 to North Carolina State, and 24 against Wake Forest. So this Syracuse team to me is not really good, but there isn't much else to put in their spot. Number 17, the Washington Huskies. They got a big matchup in the Apple Cup this weekend. They got a win against Stanford. Really no big wins, though, outside of Utah. They don't have a single ranked win. They lost to Auburn in week 1, which was a very hyped-up matchup. But here we are seeing Washington ranked at 8-3, and it'll be interesting to see because I felt like Washington was a better team than Auburn. But it'll be interesting to see if Washington could put a wrench into all the plans that Washington State has on Black Friday and knock out the Pac-12 from the playoff contention and possibly get a New Year's 6 bid. Number 16, the Florida Gators sitting at 8-3. I'm just not a huge fan of Florida right now. Throttled against Missouri. Really no chance against Georgia and Kentucky. It was kind of an inexplicable loss that they kept shooting themselves in the foot against. I'm just not high on the Florida Gators for that reason. They really only have one big win against LSU. That's all I can really say about Florida with any confidence of seeing this team go forward. They got Florida State this weekend, which should be a win, but who knows with the rivalry, of course. But they should beat the Seminoles easy. Number 15, Penn State, and I feel like Penn State is right now trying to get healthy, and they will definitely get healthy before their bowl game. But right now, they're just trying to get through the season with a 9-3 record, try and possibly get a New Year's 6 bid. And if they can get a New Year's 6 bid, you'll see Trace McSorley under all the spotlights on ESPN playing in a New Year's 6 bowl where everyone's going to be watching him. All eyes will be on him for his last game, fully healthy. And that is a dangerous team when you're playing them in New Year's 6. But right now, Penn State is, like I said, trying to get through the season. They beat Rutgers. I believe they have – I can't remember who they have next week. I think it's a cross-divisional matchup for Penn State. Check. It is Maryland. So, friends, Maryland needs to beat Penn State to get bowl eligible. Maryland coming off of that loss to Ohio State in a very... So, yeah, that's basically all I can say there. Number 14 is going to be the Utah Utes. And the Utes come into this one against BYU, the Holy War, as heavy favorites. And I expect them to go 9-3 and I also do expect them to win the Pac-12 South. As if you take a look at that race in the Pac-12 South, Arizona just played this weekend against Oregon and lost. And since Arizona State, lost to Oregon, now guess who has the advantage in the Pac-12 South? It's Utah. So Utah, doesn't matter what they do against BYU. If Arizona State's... Oh, wait. I think actually Utah would have already locked up the Pac-12 South. Let me go ahead and check this real quick. I'm pretty sure they already actually would have locked up the Pac-12 South here. Pac-12. Yeah, Utah has the Pac-12 South all locked up at 6-3 in conference with only the Holy War left to go. So congrats to them, but they got to beat BYU, try to get into that New Year's Six conversation here. Number 13, the Utah State Aggies actually moved them down the spot. They lost on a Hail Mary this weekend. Psych, no, they didn't. So what happened was there was a Hail Mary by Colorado State caught in the end zone, touchdown. Colorado State fans go crazy. Colorado State's team is going crazy. And then turns out that he touched out of bounds. It was illegal touching by Colorado State. And as a result, Utah State walks away with a 5-point victory, a close call in Fort Collins. Utah State, though, a struggle there, but I feel like they didn't play to the best capability. What their best of their capability is at 10 against Boise State. I would definitely be watching that, and maybe wink, wink. Number 12 is Horns at 9-3. Texas, ranked this high, is big for Oklahoma because that's their loss. Big for West Virginia as well. But Texas being ranked this high shows that Oklahoma doesn't have as weak of a loss as Ohio State, which could be a deal for them. We'll see if it is. Moving on quickly, and I'm not that impressed with LSU's resume. They beat Mississippi State, good team. I'll give them credit for that. They beat Georgia, and that's a good team. But losing to Florida, excusable loss, but losing to Alabama by 29, especially how Alabama's looked offensively the last couple of weeks, and they look like top 10 team. You should not be losing to Alabama by 29. But granted, Ohio State lost to Purdue by 29. But getting blanked, I don't know if anyone would get blanked against Alabama in the top 10 this year. Number 10, West Virginia. And the Mountaineers, the reason I ranked them here, of course, they have that head-to-head against Texas. Not really much of a bad loss, too, against Oklahoma State last second. And they got a great resume to go with it, or at least a good enough one with their 8-2 record, because they did have that one game against NC State that was canceled. Their resume is decent so far. They beat Texas, who's a ranked team, and lost only to Iowa State, who's another ranked team, on the road. And you can't give a whole lot of hate there. They've also beaten some teams above 500, around the 500 level. But the main thing with West Virginia and the reason why they are here and not dropping too far from me is because they still look good, even in a loss where Taylor Courtney picked. And I didn't expect the Oklahoma State offense that showed up against Oklahoma to show up against West Virginia. I thought they would be down on themselves after an emotional loss against Oklahoma. I was wrong, and they showed up, and they showed the world what they can do against West Virginia. What a game for the Pokes, and what a game played by the Mountaineers. I feel like the Mountaineers were the better team that just could not come out with a victory in the end. Number 10, West Virginia. Number 9, Oklahoma. Now we haven't seen Ohio State. I'll get to this. Oklahoma, for the 4th time this year, has allowed 40 points, and this time it's against a much inferior opponent in Kansas, in which Oklahoma was struggling to pull away. In the first half, it was really close. In the third quarter, Kansas was keeping it within 2 scores, and then finally Oklahoma was able to pull away, but not without allowing a ton of points. 40 points against Kansas is way too much, and you can say all you want about offenses in the Big 12 being amazing. That Kansas offense is not one of those teams that have an amazing offense. Peyton Bender, went off on Oklahoma, and that's a problem, especially with what's going on at Kansas within their football program. A lot of rumors going around about their coaching staff. The fact that Kansas was able to stick around with Oklahoma with all these circumstances is a problem. And Oklahoma also struggled against a 5-6 Texas Tech team, 6-5 Oklahoma State, in which they allowed 46 and 47 in each of those games, and of course losing in Texas 48-45, but we'll continue with Oklahoma when we look at number 8, which is Ohio State. Now, the reason Ohio State is above Oklahoma, and I think they got very similar resumes. Ohio State maybe with a couple better wins. Penn State has a better win, and you also got to go deeper with Michigan State. They beat them. They beat Minnesota, and they also have a common opponent in TCU, in which both of them beat. Although Ohio State beat by a lesser margin, margins aren't as important, especially when you're taking a team who's so far away from that area in Ohio, all the way down to Dallas, versus a team all the way from Norman to Fort Worth. That's a lot different in travel. But and it was without Urban Meyer. So I want to rule out that, despite them having a common opponent. TCU scored around the same amount of points, 27 against Oklahoma, 28 against Ohio State. I think there's some distinguishing factors with this. And number 1, the reason why Ohio State's ahead of them is they got a better defense. Ohio State, even with allowing 51 points against Maryland and the terrible showing defensively this weekend, they are still the 46th best scoring defense after being ranked 26th. They dropped 20 spots, and yet it's still miles above Oklahoma, while Oklahoma's 83rd. We're talking almost 40 spots ahead of Oklahoma in terms of scoring defense. Oklahoma had only dropped 7 spots. Ohio State dropped exactly 20 in terms of scoring defense after this weekend's performances, and Oklahoma was against a much more inferior opponent than a Maryland team who has pulled off upsets in the past, Texas, despite them being 5-6. And the second reason I want to say this, and it kind of stems off of the reason that I put Oklahoma in terms of scoring defenses. And again, these guys are close. Don't act like I'm not acting like Ohio State is head over heels better than Oklahoma. There's definitely a debate there, but I feel as if Ohio State and Oklahoma played, Ohio State would win. And now that would definitely be confirmation depending on how well Ohio State competes against Michigan, but we'll get to that in a second. The second reason is because Ohio State's finding different ways to win. Oklahoma is over here. They're winning in just shootouts. They're allowing all these points, 46-51. They beat Texas Tech. Then they go on and beat Oklahoma State 48-47. And then beating Kansas, allowing 40 points. The common trend here with Oklahoma is they can only win in shootouts. If someone's shutting them down offensively, they're not able to pull away. The least amount, and a lot of people say, but Army kind of shut them down and they won. Well, here's the thing with that Army game is Army possessed the ball so much, it limited so many possessions for Oklahoma, and Army was able to possess the ball so much because Oklahoma's defense struggled, and that's kind of the point exactly. They couldn't get Army off the field to get Kyler Murray on the field, and that's why that game went into overtime, is because they couldn't stop Army as much as Army stopped them. So Yes, they can only win shootouts. Ohio State, on the other hand, beat a Michigan State team who's looking a lot worse, especially with Lewerke not being able to throw the ball with a shoulder injury, and a Lombardi getting thrown in there kind of as a spark, but still not a starting quarterback caliber player. But Ohio State was able to win both defenses, because even though Ohio State was struggling offensively, Michigan State was struggling offensively, that Michigan State defense is elite. They're tremendous. They are still the number one rush defense in the country, only allowing 9 points. Even if they lost this weekend to Nebraska, they still only allowed 9 points. So that Michigan State defense is tremendous, and Ohio State was able to run on them, and they were also able to pin Michigan State deep in their field a lot of times and then stop Michigan State, force 3 turnovers, win that turnover battle. So we've seen Ohio State win in a defensive slugfest in an ugly fashion that way, but we've also seen Ohio State pull out ones that were shootouts. And I'm not just talking about Maryland that they pulled out in a shootout. I would technically say that Oregon State was a shootout earlier in the year. Ohio State scored 77 points, and they didn't need to put up 77 to win the game, but they felt like they needed to put up 77 for style points, and it looked good. They looked good while doing it. I was at that game. They scored a touchdown, I believe, on like 11 of 13 possessions. It was something crazy like that. I don't think Ohio State punted the ball at all in the game. So when you take these two teams, it's just, can Ohio State's defense step up, or which defense would you trust more to step up and make plays? And the answer is Ohio State's defense 100%. Because I will tell you this, that front four for Ohio State is tremendous. Top 10 talent even without Nick Bosa. With Nick Bosa, is probably the top 5 defensive line in the country. Oklahoma doesn't have that. And also, the secondary for Ohio State isn't great, isn't really all that good, but they're not bad either. They're rather average. They can do enough. They're good enough in the back end to make plays on the ball, stay in position, and at least be there to affect the wide receiver. The big problem Ohio State has, and this was very prevalent, and it hasn't been more obvious and prevalent, and I think this is where Ohio State can make a lot of adjustments. It is obvious that Ohio State has a problem on the linebacking core with gap assignments. Yesterday, of course, Brandon White was matched up against McFarland, Anthony McFarland, Booger's son. But Anthony McFarland broke one tackle. That was Brendan White's tackle, but it's a safety going up against a speedy back that just shook loose. And I was just impressed with how the fact that he was able to break that tackle and not really break stride and just went going and trucking. But the first touchdown, the opening touchdown, a lot of people are saying, oh, it was a missed tackle. No, it wasn't. If you watch the film of that, it was a gaping hole that McFarland took right to the house. And this was because the linebacker didn't fill the assignment. And also, the cornerbacks aren't supposed to learn how to fill those assignments in the holes and the gaps. And a lot of times you were having to see these nickelbacks. Damon Arnett stands out a little bit. Kendall Sheffield as well. Jeffrey Okuda is mostly on the outside. But those two guys were really the nickel, kind of alternating between the nickels, switching from the outside to the inside, and they were playing nickel, and it was in a nickel package against a run primary offense. It put these cornerbacks, these nickelbacks, in situations that they aren't really practicing, and that is learning how to fill a gap when it's a run play and play run defense. The biggest issue I had with Ohio State yesterday is when you knew Maryland was wanting to run it down their throat and continue running it down their throat, they would have 5 DBs in the game versus if you were to have a 4-3 set, stack the line scrimmage a little more, have 7 guys in the box, all these gaps are going to be filled, or at least most of them. Ohio State's athletic enough. They had sparks of great plays on defense yesterday against Maryland. Not enough. Or not consistently, though, and definitely too many big plays allowed. But even then, my main point, Ohio State is better than Oklahoma because I trust their defense more. And we'll get to the Ohio State-Michigan matchup when we get to Michigan. I'm going to move on. Number 7, Washington State. And I had temptation to put them above Georgia. But Georgia's done nothing for me to really move them below Washington State. Washington State looks tremendous. 69-28 in a rout. It was 55-14 at halftime against Khalil Tate, Kevin Sumlin, and the crew. And I'm just thinking to myself while this is happening, and this was a game I was broadcasting at first, then I lost connection somehow and didn't even realize it. But nonetheless, Washington State, I continued watching the game, of course, after I was done broadcasting. They looked elite on both sides of the ball. They are the most complete team out of Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Washington State. Washington State is the most complete team on both sides of the ball. So if you talk about an offense that can score, all three of these offenses can score. All three of these offenses are explosive. But Washington State has the best defense as well. So balance between offense and defense is in favor of the Washington State Cougars. And that's why Washington State's ranked 7 over Ohio State, Oklahoma. It has nothing to do with resume in that term, even though I do value Utah in a high standard. They don't really have anything behind that right now. They have Washington coming up, and they have beaten Oregon. Taking a sip of water there. And Oregon would also be considered an impressive win for Washington State. So their resume is not bad. I think what hurts them is definitely the out-of-conference schedule, but it's still not bad. They got a common opponent with Ohio State, but that is ruled out because both of them go out Oregon State. You just watch Washington State. They look a lot better than Ohio State and Oklahoma right now. And I said that about West Virginia. I still kind of think West Virginia would beat Oklahoma and Ohio State. I have West Virginia winning, by the way, in Morgantown, which I may not have been supposed to say, but I don't know if I'm broadcasting that day. I'm going on a trip with family this weekend or this week. I'm trying to get everything in for the week in terms of college football so I can pick up on Saturday or Friday. Depends on what time I get home Friday, though. Number 6, though, Georgia Bulldogs. It's pretty self-explanatory. I feel like I still am yet to surprise you guys. You know I have UCF in the top 5. I've been having that. But Georgia, just easy win against UMass. Here's where it comes. Number 5 is Michigan. And we'll talk about UCF and why they are ranked ahead of Michigan. But let's talk about Michigan struggling against Indiana. I don't think it's that big of a deal that they did. And this is a great point that Joel Platt and Gus Johnson showed in the booth. This is what happens when you play a conference opponent in a possible trap game before your rival. Michigan played Indiana, a decent team. Not anything special, but around 500 possible bowl team if they can knock off Purdue next week. The winner of that game is going to a bowl game. Indiana is going to give you a tough fight, and they've always done this before Ohio State or before with Ohio State and Michigan State and Michigan. And they did it again, and this didn't really surprise me. I expected it to be a decently close game that Michigan was going to pull out. I did not expect Indiana to win. So I'm not worried about that. Like I said, it's a trap game. And that's the thing with Ohio State is it was a trap game. And Chase Winovich, I believe, is out for the Ohio State game. If I'm not wrong about that, that is big. He's the leader, heart and soul of that defense. And I can already see it now. If Michigan's going to beat Ohio State, now all of a sudden I'm kind of in the middle with this. I've been favoring Michigan the last 3 weeks. Not since the Purdue loss for Ohio State, but just I saw them against Nebraska, and I'm like, okay, this team is better on the ground, and they have an ability to go offensively. But man, if they look like that defensively, I think Michigan would stop Ohio State more often than Ohio State could stop Michigan. But without Chase Winovich, I feel like Ohio State could score more, and it makes it more of a level playing field where it's a 50-50 shot to me. I'm probably going to end up picking the better team, which I think is Michigan right now, but we'll see. And I don't know necessarily if I think things need to happen ahead of Ohio State to make the playoff. Specifically for me, I would want If it were my way, and I would be making the top 4 that go into the semifinals, and I'm speaking from the Ohio State perspective from what I would want UCF to lose in the conference championship to Houston or Houston or Memphis, the winner of that ball game. I would want Alabama, Notre Dame, and Clemson to win out. I mean, it really doesn't matter between Notre Dame and Clemson, but Alabama just don't lose to Georgia. And finally, 2-loss Big 12 champion and Washington State knocked off. I would take Ohio State over Oklahoma, as I said. Even so, yeah, I mean, I would just need Washington State knocked off in my system. However, to realistically make it for Ohio State, I think it's starting to become this way, and it's looking this way. You may have to have UCF lose. I don't know if you do. I don't know where the committee is going to value UCF, but Ohio State may need UCF to lose, but you definitely would need Washington State. I don't see Ohio State jumping Washington State and Oklahoma to lose one game. Doesn't matter if it's against West Virginia or in the Big 12 championship, just have Oklahoma lose one game in terms of committee. Because even though I don't believe Oklahoma's a better team than Ohio State, I think the committee will give the nod to Oklahoma. And just for safe measure, LSU loses to Texas A&M. But back to Michigan. For me, all they got to do is win out for the College Football Playoff Committee to earn my top 4. And again, this doesn't matter, but let's just say hypothetically I was making the top 4. You would need one of the top 4 teams to lose if you're Michigan. And I think if Michigan wins out and Georgia wins out, Georgia will jump Michigan as well, because Georgia would have that win against Alabama. But Michigan would need one of these 4 teams to lose, or UCF not to look good. One of the 2. Number 4 is UCF. Man, guys, I was really impressed with the UCF Knights this weekend. Mackenzie Milton was tremendous to watch again, but what was the biggest surprise was UCF's defense looked like men playing with – I don't want to say that. Never mind. They looked legit on defense, and they looked like they were able to put things together, and that's why UCF was legit. Jasinski, he's a great prospect. As a linebacker, and definitely the heart and soul of that defense as well. Talk about Chase Winovich. How about Pat Jasinski? That guy is tremendous. And even you got a guy who is a big influencer on all phases of the ball. You got Mackenzie Milton on the offense, defense, Pat Jasinski. But how about the punter? Even though he wasn't crazy yesterday, Mac Loudermilk. That dude. He's got so much swagger for a punter. And I will also say this, too. I really like UCF's running back tandem. You throw Otis Anderson as possibly a receiving back, a scat back that you could use. You also have McGowan and Killens in the game. Those guys are tremendous, and I wouldn't want any better running back core than that. UCF, it's hard for me to keep them out of the top 4, so I'm not going to. Number 3 is going to be Notre Dame. Obvious reasons killed Syracuse. In fact, I considered them above Clemson, but I just could not do it, especially because since the Syracuse game, Clemson has just looked tremendous, and Notre Dame's had their fair share of struggles against the likes of Ball State, Vanderbilt, a struggle against Pitt. So it's not been easy sledding for Notre Dame this season, so I'm going to keep them at 3. Number 2, Clemson. I think it's safe to say they're South Carolina going to be a gimme. That will be Pitt. But I said this about the Duke game either. This isn't a game that Clemson can just sleepwalk through and come up with a 30-point win. And which didn't. They had to turn it on. They had to Clemson. They had to get things together. They were down 6-0 early, scored 35 straight points to end that ball game. So, with that being said, I just don't see Clemson losing. And same thing with Alabama. They do have Georgia looming, but I just don't see that happening. And if it does happen, it's going to be a nightmare for the College Football Playoff Committee. But Alabama right now is head over heels the best team in the country. I think there are teams that can compete with Alabama. I don't think there are teams that are better with Alabama. And I think there are teams that can beat Alabama. But overall, talent-wise, there's not a team that's better than Alabama, and that needs to be accepted across the country, even if you're an Alabama hater. I'm not an advocate for this whole thing that Alabama's the best team ever, but I am an advocate for saying that Alabama has the most talent that we've seen in a while. All right. Take my final sip probably of this broadcast. Cincinnati's right on the outside looking in. I don't discredit them for a hard-fought loss, but at the end of the day, you're a two-loss American Athletic Conference team with not a great resume. With that being said, though, Cincinnati, again, a hard-fought team, comes up with a couple big wins this season. A good team there. Army is the next team out. They lost to Oklahoma and Duke. A couple of losses that aren't too terrible, but I will also say this. Army has played a rather weak schedule outside of Duke and Oklahoma, and even Duke is kind of borderline top 40. I would still probably consider them top 40, but nonetheless, Army is playing a bunch of teams that really don't belong on the field, and their best win was diminished heavily with Buffalo losing this week to Ohio. Wisconsin's that next team, and I think Wisconsin's just not the same old Wisconsin that we've seen, but I still think they are very talented. We're seeing Jonathan Taylor run on with Penn State with a lot of success there. He had a tremendous game this past week for the Badgers in a winning effort against Purdue in overtime in a pretty much a shootout, and probably the highest-scoring game we've seen from Wisconsin in a while. Michigan's also another one of their losses. They've lost to BYU. That one kind of stings if you're Wisconsin. I think people overreacted to BYU beating Wisconsin. I felt like that was just a bad loss. And Northwestern, not a bad loss. So really they got 3 losses that aren't that bad, or 3 losses that aren't bad, and then 1 loss that is pretty bad, but upsets happen, and it was by a field goal. Missouri is another team that's in this top or in the outside looking in. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Missouri since they gave Alabama a little bit of hell. But I will say this, Missouri's looking a lot better as of late, dominating it in Tennessee as if they were Georgia and Alabama. Oklahoma State, they are a 6-5 team that I'm putting here, and I kind of considered just for the fact that Oklahoma State has been able to compete with these top-tier teams. They've been such an inconsistent team, sitting at 3-5 in Big 12 play with only 1 more game to play against TCU, in which I actually think they will lose, drop that, and TCU is going to get bowl eligible because they're, of course, going to be coming off of a couple of emotional games. They will be drained, and TCU will pull out. But I still think that Oklahoma State, as of now, when you look at what they've done, they've beaten a couple of top 25 teams in Texas, Boise State, and West Virginia. Just bad losses against TCU, Baylor, Kansas State, I believe, was another loss. Yikes for Oklahoma State. A weird season for them. The Pokes have played at times like a top 20 team, but at times they've played like a bottom 20 team. And Oregon's that final team. I feel like Oregon's hitting their stride again, kind of like they had it near the early to middle part of the season. With that being said, though, it's hard to find Oregon another quality win. They got Oregon State left, and that's it. They aren't going to win the North. I doubt I'm going to end up seeing them in the rankings unless a lot happens ahead of them. That will do it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. In my top 25 here heading into Rivalry Week. And I think it is honestly a fun week coming up. Either Tuesday or Wednesday before I leave, I'm going to bring out my bowl projections video. I'm going to start working on my bowl projections while watching Championship Drive and the rest of the NFL tonight. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, and if you have not seen all of this joining in right now, go ahead and go back and watch this. And those of you that went back and watched this, thank you very much. I'll see you later.